Welcome to the Hammam Dharma podcast for March 22nd, 2020. Hey, how about a redo on this year? This has been a wild couple of weeks, hasn't it? Yeah, it was kind of a surprise for me too. This Dharma talk was really supposed to be about the translated verse I put up called Taking Care of Things Before They Arise. Now, this is a pretty nice verse. Like I said, there's been a lot of craziness the last couple of weeks. I mean, beyond craziness, really. So I'm kind of conflicted whether I should talk about that or I should keep talking about this verse. I may try to do both here. Let's see what happens. Because I'll tell you a secret. I don't have a script. I just speak as it arises. I just speak as I feel a connection to the problem. And this is how Kunsten used to give her talks, except she was, making a very deep connection and really just seeing what was in front of her. And so for her, I suspect it was a little bit like saying, hey, look at that. That wall is beige and that painting is blue. And so it wasn't that much of a stretch for her. And what she saw was very clear and very specific. Whereas what I see and what I am able to convey is not that level, because I'm not at that level. And I think that's true for everybody. But here we go. So this Dharma talk has a really nice aspect that you don't have to passively wait for something to happen. If you firmly input the thought that, hey, before this arises, let's take care of it. Okay, true self. Before this arises, keep it from being a problem. And because this isn't normally, I don't know about you, but for me, this isn't my default setting. Frankly speaking, my default setting tends to be a little bit reactive, where it's like by the time something finally gets my attention, it's a little bit like, okay, now it's a problem. But taking care of something before it becomes a problem isn't always the way I approach things. So for me, it was a pretty good Dharma talk too. Here, when we have something like this, I usually translate the first draft, and then I check with one of the people at the Hammam International Culture Institute, where we do our translations, and I check with them and I say, hey, did I catch the meaning of this? Is there anything that was a little bit off? And then one of the people working with me looks it over, and sometimes they go, wow, that was you completely got it. And other times they go, this part here, that's not right, or that's not quite it, or you misunderstood that. And so we talk about what the Korean means, and then we figure out a way to say that in English. But the whole point here is that, we can entrust an intention that something should be taken care of before it arises. So one time Deng Sim said to me, I asked her a question. I said, okay, if time doesn't exist, if the present, future, and past are all one interconnected flowing whole, shouldn't it be just as easy to change the past as it is to change the present? And so my answer was kind of like, well, what's going on here? And she said, if something's going to be a problem, or something's been a problem, entrust the thought that you should remember to let go of that when it comes up next time. So kind of the point was, if you aren't remembering to let go of a issue, when you become aware of that, and you're aware of your habit, you're aware that you're getting caught up in it and you haven't been letting go of it so well, then at that point, entrust the thought, okay, in the future when this thing happens, let me be sure to let go of it right away. Now, the Deng Sim was kind of funny because that wasn't the question I asked, right? But she would always do this where she would give you the answer that you needed. It's like, no, that's not the question you're asking. But this is the question you should have been asking. This is the answer that will actually help you the most right now. So I don't know if there was another question that I had, or that some issue I was struggling with that I was unaware of, or that wasn't really fully conscious of, or that was a roundabout answer. The Hang Sims talked about, I think it was maybe a little bit of both, but the Hang Sims talked about Chandojis, or she mentioned a few times helping people who've passed away. Where they're having something they did in the past is causing a lot of problems now. And she basically said that she has to go back and forth like hundreds or thousands of times to unravel all of the side effects of an action that somebody did. So I've spoken about this before, I wrote about this before somewhere, but so if I, for example, if I cheated somebody and then I caused that person to be evicted from their home, and they were evicted from their home, and then maybe their family did something stupid, or their family did something stupid, or they caused themselves to fall into a worse place. Well, all that may have happened because of what I did. Whereas even though they were tempted to go rob a store, if I had not caused them to be evicted, they would have stayed in their home, and they would have resisted that temptation to go rob a store, and their children wouldn't have gotten themselves into trouble, or their children wouldn't have grown up without a parent, or their children wouldn't have gone into a foster home. And then all this kind of cascade of problems that may have started from that one action of mine. Because of selfishness, because of lack of self-awareness, I just did my thing. I just did whatever it was. I didn't feel all the cascade of consequences. I wasn't aware of all the cascade of pain. Or I may have sensed it and just ignored it because of my own desire to do my own thing, my own desire to get whatever it was I wanted. That happens a lot. People they sort of sense I shouldn't be doing this, but they want something else more. And so they bury that feeling. They cover it up with that. They cover it up with justifications. Well, it's okay because it's okay. You look at anybody who's a con artist or who's involved in that kind of stuff. If they aren't a complete sociopath, then they're almost always lying to themselves first. So with con artists, you see this. If they really wanted the money, to keep their money, they would have been more careful. Or, they make up some justification they tell themselves first, and then they try to con you, or then they try to do something. There's always some justification. So in my own life, if I have a conflict, or if I have an argument, or something's a little bit rough between me and someone else, if I find myself always justifying my behavior, if I find myself coming back to an incident and keep telling myself why it was okay, or keep talking to myself about that incident, that's a pretty good sign that I'm in the wrong. That's a pretty good sign that there's something not quite right about the way I'm thinking about that. Where somehow, if I have to keep blaming them, if I have to keep justifying what I did, then I was wrong. And I need to repent on that and try to make it right to the best that I can. One of the really interesting things about this Dharma talk that Hang Sim gave, and the title is Taking Care of Problems Before They Arise, and it was on March 5th on the blog wakeupandlaugh.com. The Hang Sim gives the example that you have to give rise to an intention in order for it to manifest. So I've always used the example of, it's a little bit like having a servant next to you. And you can be really thirsty, you can be really hungry, but if you're just sitting there and you're not saying anything to the servant just stands there, right? They're just like, okay, nice day today, da-da-da. Meanwhile, you can be grumbling inside, boy, I'm sure thirsty. I wish they'd go get me some water. But if you don't actually tell them to go get you some water, they won't do it. But once you say, oh, excuse me, I could really use a glass of water, they're like, oh, okay, get the water and come back. Now, that's a little bit my approach to doing things, where, and frankly, it's a little bit scientific method, because I call it the black box approach, where you do A, then something happens at stage B, and you see the result C. You don't know what happens at B. It's like it goes into a black box, it functions, and then C comes out. But if you know if you get A, and you consistently get C, you don't have to know exactly what happened at B. The important thing is, if I do A, I get C. Or, frankly, if I do A, I get N. Every time I do A, N comes out. If I don't do A, N doesn't come out. Or instead of A, I do this, then I get some other result. And then, think about science. People didn't understand oxygen, but they knew that if they lit a flame in a bell jar, that if there was a small animal in there, it would die. So, they didn't know oxygen, but they knew when the flame died, the squirrel died, or the bat died. It was like, okay, something that the flame is using up is there that the bat needs too. And when that's gone, the flame and the bat both die. What is this thing? Well, we don't know what it is, but there's something there. So that's a little bit the way spiritual practice goes. You keep trying, you keep trying, you keep trying, and you pay attention. And you don't have to understand why it happens, but you kind of do need to be paying attention. The more you pay attention, the more you can notice when something happens. The more you can notice when, oh, if I'm blaming other people, I feel kind of terrible. Or if I'm still blaming other people, if I'm not letting go, that's when I get really angry. If you're paying attention, you can start seeing these connections. Oh, when I'm letting go of I, when I'm letting go of me, when I'm letting go of I did, or he did this to me, or she's doing this, then even though somebody behaves badly, it's just like water off a duck's back, right? It's just kind of like, oh, yeah, okay, sure. All right, that's fine. Sorry, go do your own thing. And it just doesn't affect you. Whereas if I'm full of thoughts of, oh, he should do it this way, or she should do it that way, or I did it this way, so other people should do it this, this I. You start noticing, okay, whenever I've got this I, that's when stuff gloms onto it. That's when stuff builds up around that, and I start having problems. But if you're paying attention, you realize the more I let go of I, the more that disappears. And the reason why I'm saying this is because the Hengsenim made a really interesting point in this Dharma talk she gave, where she described this perfectly calm state, the state before any thoughts arises. In the past, she's described this as Buddha. And she said when an intention arises, or when you give rise to a thought and entrust it there, and it begins to move, she said that's Dharma. And then when it manifests out into the world, that's Sangha. But in this case, she compared it to the father and son, where the father is this past consciousness, this big consciousness, and the son is our present consciousness, our present level of awareness. And she said when there's no intentions are raised and entrusted, then when everything's completely quiet, then the son, your present consciousness, becomes one with this big quiet consciousness, your foundation. But when you give rise to an intention and you entrust it to this foundation, then she said it's like this intention, this foundation, joins with your present consciousness and energizes it. It energizes that intention. So that intention goes out and manifests into the world. But if you don't connect with the foundation, that energizing aspect doesn't happen. She uses the phrase, she doesn't say entrust it to your foundation, because for her that was a given. If I have have a thought, if I have a thought, oh, it should be like this, or it should be like that, or I wish this wouldn't happen, and I don't entrust it, you get the same result where it isn't energized by the foundation, because there was no connection made with the foundation. So I have to entrust it to my foundation, and then it makes that connection, and that energy flows back and forth, and that thought is energized. So if I say, okay, everyone should live healthy, all my family should live healthy, and we should get through this situation with as minimum fuss as possible, then it meets that connection, that's energized, and things begin to move that way. Now, there's two conditions here. One is my actual ability to let go, and the other is karma does kind of pop up here. Now, we can dissolve a lot of that, but especially when I'm talking about other people's situation, then it gets harder, because there's a lot of the stuff where people have to be doing their own work. And there's a lot of parts that I can't do for other people. It's the same thing with prenatal education. I can turn on the lights, or the same thing with helping the spirits of the dead. I can turn on the lights. I can make sure the room is warm and comfortable. I can make sure all the tools are present, but they're the ones who have to do the work. They're the ones who have to sit down at the desk and do the homework. No matter, if you have kids, you've probably experienced this. I've experienced this being the kid, that, no matter how much your parents nag, it's the kid who still has to do it. It's the kid who still has to do the homework. And if they aren't doing it on their own, then it doesn't matter. But there's I guess the word is an inflection point, where that extra help, that extra warmth, that extra light, that extra tools, sometimes that's enough to really make a big difference. And even if you're just doing the work, having a more comfortable environment, having that supporting energy there to help you do the work makes a big deal. So that kind of intention we give rise to really is a valuable thing. If somebody's sick, then you can say, let them get through this with a minimum of fuss. Let them get over this with a minimum of suffering and hardship. And entrust that thought and go forward like that. It gets really easy to say, oh, don't let any problems ever happen. And that would be nice, but for whatever reason, things don't always go that way. Sometimes we all have problems. We all have difficulties. We all have hardships. And how do we get through that? What do we learn from that? If we're just trying to get through life with a minimum of physical discomfort, we're kind of making a problem for ourselves. The purpose in life isn't to get through life with a minimum of physical discomfort. The purpose in life is to learn and to grow and to evolve ourselves. And sometimes that involves physical discomfort. And sometimes there's just stuff happening, and we just do our best not to get caught up in it. Okay, this stuff is happening. There's a storm outside, but I'm still going to do what I have to do to work on growing and evolving. I'm not going to let myself get distracted by this. Right now, if you look at the news, you could spend 18 hours a day worrying about the economy and the virus. But is that all that's out there in the world? No. It's like the whole world is 360 degrees around us. And all of that is just 1 or 2 degrees. That's just 1 or 2 tiny aspects. Now, they're big aspects, and they have an impact on people's lives. But I have 358 other degrees to give my attention to. Am I going to always come back to those 1 or 2? This is a decision that we have to make. It's like, no, I'm not going to let myself fall into this worry. I may have this problem, I may have this situation, but the time I need to actually spend focusing on that and figuring a way through that is, say, only 5% of my time. It's only 10% of my time. And yet, if I'm not careful, I'll spend 90% of my time worrying about that. I mean, even SNMs, it's a human thing. And you have to make an effort to say, okay, I'm going to let go of this. I'm not going to let this one or two things, this other person's behavior, this whatever it is, I'm not going to let that dominate my awareness. I'm not going to let that distract me from the fact that I need to be letting go of everything. My job as a human being is to learn about my foundation, to learn to function in connection with that, and to learn to entrust everything to that. That's my job as a human being. And to help other people become aware of this. But that's why we're here. That's why we have evolved at the highest level. It's not just to fill our bellies and try to reproduce. There was no need to become a human being if that was our goal. I mean, birds do that just fine. Worms do that just fine. So why are we here as a human being? It's, like I said, it's not just for reproduction and filling our bellies. How do we figure out how to evolve? How do we get in touch with this big one, this big functioning, live connected to that, and live relying upon that in all the stuff of our lives? In the good times, in the bad times, in the boring times. This is the fundamental Wadu. This is the fundamental koan. This big one. Getting in touch with this. Entrusting everything there. Even if you don't see it. Even if you don't feel it. Learning to realize it's there. Learning to have faith in that. And say, that's taking care of me from the time I've been a bug, before I was a bug, all the way up to now. I just have to keep entrusting that. Keep being positive and keep entrusting everything there and trust that that's going to show me the way forward. This is practice. This is Dharma. This is our purpose as a human being. Thank you. This has been the Hammam Dharma podcast for March 22nd, 2020.